Hey everyone! Today we're going to be diagnosing and replacing the crank sensor in my 1992 Acura Legend. Stay tuned. As part of the ongoing no start and misfire saga with my 1992 Acura Legend, I finally got a check engine code. The problem is that I misinterpreted the check engine flashes on the dash as a code 4 instead of a code 14, and started down the trail of diagnosing the crank sensor. Just as a note here, code 4 is denoted by 4 short flashes, while code 14 is denoted by 1 long flash and 4 short flashes. Since we're on the subject, I'll quickly show you how to obtain the codes. With the ignition switch in the off position, I lightly partially unscrew the plastic screws on the passenger side lower cover, then pull them out the rest of the way. I then disconnected the harness connector from the cover. Next, I pulled back the carpet to reveal the service connector that sits above the ECU. I used a paper clip to jumper the terminals on the connector. One quick note here is be sure you're putting a jumper on the service connector and not the connector that attaches to the lower cover, as this could short out the footwell lights. You can then start the car and wait for the check engine flashes on the dash. Following the troubleshooting chart in the service manual, the first step after receiving a check engine is to confirm it. This involves turning off the car, pulling fuse 15 in the underdash fuse panel for at least 10 seconds to clear the ECU of any codes, then reinstalling it and starting the car. If the check engine returns with the same code, we've found a persistent failure. We're going to test the crank sensor, so I'll remove the harness cover's 10mm nuts and the 10mm bolt that attaches the harness cover to the timing cover. I'll release the sensor from the bracket by pushing on the tab and lifting. Then I'll separate the connector. And that's the part we want to test, which includes 8 terminals lettered A through H. There are actually 4 sensors in this package, each with their own check engine codes and terminal pairs. Code 4 applies to terminals A and B as an example. To test our code 4, I'll set the multimeter on the resistance setting, and I'm going to stick a couple narrower back probes into terminals A and B so I don't damage the terminals. Per the specification, we're looking for between 650 and 900 ohms. It's also a good idea to test all terminal pairs while you're at it. And we're reading 0.665k ohms or 665 ohms, so that terminal pair is in good shape. If any of the terminal pairs fail this step, then just go ahead and replace the crank sensor. If the crank sensor's terminal pairs pass the resistance test, we'll move on to testing for continuity to body ground. I have the multimeter's black probe connected to a body ground, and I'll just touch each crank sensor terminal with the red probe. I'll also set the multimeter to beep if continuity exists. The crank sensor checked out just fine, so I've moved on to checking the wiring going from the ECU to the crank sensor. So I have removed the second connector from the bottom from the ECU, and I'm back probing terminals B15 and B16 with my multimeter. I have the multimeter set in the resistance setting, and you can see there it's 0.666k or 666 ohms. So that looks good, and you just want to repeat that process for all the other terminal pairs. As a last test of the wiring, what I'm going to do is check for continuity to body ground. So I've got my red probe there, back probing terminal B15 on the ECU connector. And then what I'm going to do is touch the body ground with the black probe. And I've also set my multimeter to beep just in case I do have any sort of continuity to ground. And you just want to repeat that process for terminals B13, B11, and B9 if you're getting any other check engine codes related to the crank sensor. If you reach this point and your crank sensor is checked out just fine and your wiring checks out just fine, then you'll probably have to look at replacing the ECU and seeing if that solves your problem. So we're going to pretend here that our crank sensor did indeed check out as bad, and we're going to go ahead and replace it. We'll start by disconnecting the negative battery terminal. Next, I've removed the strut bar and the spark plugs. The reason I removed the spark plugs is because it makes it easier to turn the engine by hand, which we're going to have to do later. We need to remove the timing cover on the passenger side, also known as right, and the driver's side, also known as left. To get to the right timing cover, I'll remove the intake components all the way up to the throttle body. I'm going to remove the one 10mm bolt here on the front. Then I'll loosen the two clamps using a 10mm socket also. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove some of these clamps here so we can get these hoses off. So we take this one off here, slide it back that way. Just take this hose off. This hose comes off here. There's a clamp right here. We'll take that off there. And we'll take off that clamp there. So this hose can come off. We're going to take off this clamp here because we need this whole hose to come off so we can get this cover off. So I'm going to pull that this way. If you have a tough time getting that hose off, you can use something like these pliers here. Just kind of gently grasp here and then just wiggle it like that and it should break free, then you can just pull it off. So I'm going to take this off. This hose should come free then when you pull this away. And then the only thing left to do is to take the hose out of here. Now I want to get the air box separated here. Just one clip there, second clip there, one more way down here. Okay, and just slide this out. That's out of there. And then we're going to go ahead and separate these two here. To separate the air box, just lift up at the joint and then the air box can be removed. It should come off. And then this should slide off the throttle body here. Just like that. So this is all free now. We need to get these vacuum hoses off here. So take those all off. There's 4 of them. And then we want to also undo this bolt here. That's 10mm. Now that's free. We're going to go ahead and remove this harness cover here. And then there is a bolt right there. Let's take that out. And that'll allow these lines to lift up a little bit. As you can see here, my timing cover is a bit scarred up because I've removed it multiple times. So you may want to put some painter's tape on that cover to protect it. To remove the timing cover, there are 3 10mm bolts that have to be removed. Okay, and this third one is way down here. Go ahead and take that off. The 2 upper bolts have a different look to them than the lower bolt. Alright, so we're ready to remove the cover. And this is going to take a little bit of wiggling and manipulating and a little bit of patience to get it out. There we go. So there's your cover. To remove the left timing cover, there are also 3 10mm bolts to remove. There's one. You may have to play with various combinations of sockets and extensions to reach all the bolts. So I have a short socket, and a short extension and a longer extension, and then also a deep 10mm socket. Okay, that one's out. Hopefully I don't drop it here. Here's a location of the last bolt that needs to be removed. Alright, so this cover is ready to come off, and we need to get the dipstick out of the way so we don't break it. This side is a little bit easier, but it'll still require a little bit of wiggling and some patience. There we go. To get to the crank sensor, I need to remove the timing belt, and this requires setting the number 1 piston at top dead center. So I'll do this by cranking the engine clockwise by hand. And what I've done here is place a long screwdriver in the spark plug hole so you can watch it rise then peak, denoting top dead center. I'm going to turn the crankshaft using a 19mm deep socket and a long handled ratchet. And I'll also show you the timing marks I need to line up on the cam pulleys and the crank pulley to confirm top dead center on the number 1 piston. So fortunately for us, we didn't have to go far to get to top dead center on the number 1 piston. That might be it right there. So as you can see here on the right cam pulley, there is a pink mark that needs to line up with the orangish line on the rear cover. On the left cam pulley, there's a blue mark that needs to line up with the line on the rear cover. The crank pulley marks are a little harder to video, so here's a picture. There's a single mark on the rear of the pulley to the left of the 3 marks, and that single mark needs to line up with the arrow on the plastic cover. One thing I like to do before I remove the timing belt is to mark the belt where the pink and blue marks are located on the cam pulleys, and this helps to ensure the belt is properly reinstalled. I just use a silver Sharpie marker. Now you don't really have to do this, but I like to loosen the cam pulley bolts before I remove the timing belt, and that prevents the camshaft from spinning with the force of loosening the bolts and possibly losing your timing. Okay. I'm going to loosen the 12mm adjusting bolt 180 degrees, then I'll push on the belt near the right cam pulley to relieve some of the belt's tension. That's good. I'll then tighten the bolt back up, but not too tight, since this will add tension back onto the belt and make it harder to remove it. I'm going to gradually work the belt off the cam pulley on the right side. Once the belt's removed from the right pulley, I'm going to feed it to the right to provide some slack so I can remove it from the left pulley. Okay, so we should have enough slack to get it off this pulley here. Let's go ahead and get this off. Okay, so that's off there. And then now we just want to remove these 3 bolts here. Okay, so at this stage we're ready to take the rear timing cover off and remove the crank sensor. I'm going to take the 3 bolts out for the rear cover first, then I'll remove the 3 crank sensor bolts. By taking all 6 bolts out before removing the cover, it'll make it a lot easier to get the cover out. Otherwise, you risk damaging it. So actually I can go ahead and take the sensor out first, just by pulling it through here. There's our sensor, and that'll make it easier for us to get the cover off now. There's our cover.